good day wherever you might be. Seems like most of us are along the West Coast. We're going to talk about resumes and cover letters. As you can imagine, there is a lot that goes into resumes and cover letters, and you probably are always looking online trying to find out what in the world am I supposed to focus on. At least that's what I hear from a lot of people. They'll Google best resumes, they'll Google best cover letters, and what I find is when I come and see them, they're overwhelmed or too many things to consider. And so hopefully today I'm going to help you understand what's most important. Know that there's lots of gray area. There's not a black and white. There's not a lot of rules. But hopefully we'll give you some good guidelines today so you feel a little bit more productive and focused on where you want to go. And I have received a lot of good feedback from folks. Once they implement a lot of these changes, they start to get a little bit more of that traction and they feel a lot better about how they're presenting themselves. So, Courtney did such a great job talking about personal branding, and that really is the first step to start to think about, what do I want my resume to look like? What does my cover letter look like? What is the best way in which it represents me? So hopefully you spent some time the next couple of days, because that will help infuse how you're looking at your resume, how you're looking at your cover letter, and it'll lead to interviews and all the way along the way. So we'll cover some of those things. A few little housekeeping things here. For those of you that haven't been in the White Stag, that's where I'm placed right now on the second floor, and my window faces front. And so sometimes you might hear trucks, ambulances, fire trucks. So hopefully it won't be too noisy, but know that might be something that you're hearing. And for those of you that are in Portland and would like to someday have a one-on-one, this is where you would sit. You can see the chair right over there. So this is the space where we have our counseling session. So now you kind of know where I am and how I might be available to you. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. All right, so here we are, Real Talk, we're back, so welcome back. Let's go to the next slide. All right, so when we're thinking about resumes, there's a lot to think about. And what is the main purpose of a resume? Well, it's really to advertise you. And again, kind of like the branding concept, we don't necessarily like to think about that it's an advertisement, but in a lot of ways it is. So we need to think about how are we representing ourselves in the very best possible way. How are we communicating that? Are we being clear? Communication is so important to employers, whether it's in the oral form or in the written form. So be thinking about, how am I communicating myself? What is the right thing for me to showcase? There's so many things to focus on. I know sometimes we have these experiences and we want to list every single thing that we've done, but really let's just focus on the things that we want to continue to do or ways that we can show our progress versus listing every single thing that we've ever done in each experience. So really focus on showcasing the very best. And ultimately, the point of the resume is to get to the interview. So how do we offer a resume that will say, hey, let's take a look at this person? Now, keep in mind, when you are applying for jobs, I typically recommend that if you qualify for about 75% of the expectations, go ahead and give it a shot and send in your resume. So be thinking about that when you're trying to get to the interview. Also know that it is a work in progress. No resume is ever done. There can always be work. And I don't say that to overwhelm you. I say that so that you think about that it's just always something that we can be tweaking and working on. I've worked with a number of people who, they've had their parents look at it, they've had HR people look at it, and there's still, some of it is kind of old school and it needs to be updated. So I'm sure that you'll find that when you submit your resume, even if you think it's been vetted by all the best people, there's always something to improve on. So, and that's what we want to help you do. Tailoring your resume is something that, gets mixed reviews. Of course, you want it to communicate your personal brand, and hopefully you're only applying to places that are relevant. I'm not necessarily a fan that says you have to revamp your resume every single time, because that takes so much work. But again, if you have a very tailored, focused job search process, which we'll talk more about on Tuesday, I do believe that we can maybe move some things around here and there, but you shouldn't have to rewrite a resume every single time. The other thing is it's so easy to get confused about which resume did I send to which organization, and that, just organizing that alone can be such a challenge for you. One way to kind of take care of that is to have one very long version of all of your experiences. So as new opportunities come up for you, you can check those out and move things around and bring the most relevant things up front. So never lose anything that you've ever done, but we are going to always strive to have one page. Mostly all of us as recent graduates, one page will be sufficient, especially knowing that people are only spending 20 seconds looking at it. We want to keep them engaged. So I have seen some recent grads with 2 pages, which is okay. But again, you just need to make sure that it's all relevant. I'm not a fan of somebody that has maybe 1 page and then a third up at the top. To me, that says, okay, you weren't efficient enough with your language, so we can help you tighten up that language if that is a case that may be occurring for you. The other thing that can be challenging is, what word should I use? What language should I use? I'm not talking about a foreign language, but what language should we use that makes it engaging, or relevant to the job? So I encourage you to, go on the internet and look at some of those jobs that look interesting to you. Look and see how they describe that skill set or that accomplishment. And if that's you, then start adapting some of that language, because every industry has different buzzwords, whether it's tech or creative, or I know there's some GIS folks, so there's a lot of technical language in what you would need to convey in your resume. So really, really pay attention to that. What are some guidelines? So design is important, but not really overly designed. I'm not really a big fan of the Times New Roman kind of boring resume that's black and white. Black and white is okay, but don't feel like you have to have it be really conservative, unless that is your field. If you're a lawyer, maybe that's what they want to see. So just really know your industry. I think it's great to have kind of a masthead up at the top. A lot of you do have a creative side to you. So I encourage you, maybe at the top you have something that indicates maybe a logo that represents your name, or just some color in the headers, something that says something about you. So it's okay to have design, you just can't have it be distracting so that it takes away from the content of what's on the resume. It's also really important to be consistent. So whatever format you come up with in terms of listing your position, then the organization, the city, the state, and the years, make sure that's consistent in your education and each one of your experiences. Sometimes I see people tend to mix it up. And again, if you're thinking about a recruiter spending 20 to 30 seconds on that, that can be discombobulating and say, where am I supposed to look? Because they start to get a rhythm of what they visually want to see. So make sure that you're consistent in your complete layout of what you're doing. Proofreading is key. I can't tell you how many mangers are out there and not managers. So make sure you're reading it carefully for edits. Have 3 people look at it too. When you become so close to a document like that, you really do kind of lose what you're trying to, you can't see all those little things. And as much as those recruiters are trying to hire people and to fill those gaps, they're also looking for things to get rid of people. So if they see an error, they're going to say, if they weren't that careful to do this, they don't care enough about the job. Make sure what you're including is relevant. It kind of goes back to don't put every single bullet that you have in there. Really focus on what's going to be most important for that job and the kind of work that you want to continue doing and developing. So focus on what's relevant. And then the last 3 bullets on this slide are the most important, and the ones that I really want you to take away from is, when you're trying to think about what you want to write for each one of your experiences, these are the 3 criteria I want you to consider, because we get kind of stuck in this duties and responsibilities notion instead of what did I accomplish, how did I add value, did I do it in a measurable way. So I launched a fundraising event where 300 people attended and we raised $1,000, if that was an activity that you did in school or something like that. That shows not only accomplishment, but how you added value to the organization, and you did it in a measurable way by numbers and how much money that you raised. So again, get away from planned an event or, kept track of data. Talk about what you accomplished, what the end result was, the value that you brought, and any kind of numbers. Now, I do want to clarify, I don't want you to feel like you have to have all 3 of these in every bullet. Sometimes that doesn't always work. Sometimes there isn't a measurement, but maybe you know, made something more efficient. So please don't get hung up on having every single one, but please consider at least acknowledging one of those 3 when you're writing one of those bullets. Format. Okay, so this is, people always ask, this is always the main thing when we do these job search groups, what kind of format? So first you want to start with your header. So again, we kind of talked on that. That can show a little bit more of your brand, your personality. Maybe there's a little bit of color, but that really is just your name, your email, and your phone number. You don't need to have an address anymore, and especially for a lot of you that are interested in considering places like Vancouver, Portland, or Seattle, so you're open to a few locations, sometimes that address can be a hindrance to you. They might say, I don't, you know, it's gonna be too hard to interview that person, or whatever it may be. So keep it simple, keep it clean. The other thing that I've gotten feedback from recruiters is you don't need to use your formal name. If your name is Christopher Williams, but you go by Chris Williams, make sure it's Chris Williams. However you want to be referred to. Otherwise, you kind of get into that funky little awkward piece of, what do I call you? Do you go by this? Just, you know, be really clear about what you go by. A lot of times people like to have an objective. Personally, I'm not a fan of the objective, but that can be optional for you. Typically, what I see when people do the objective is they say what they're applying to. Well, you're going to probably cover that in the cover letter, so it is kind of a wasted space, and especially, you know, if you are looking for space, I think that's an unnecessary item to have on your resume. Now, the next 2, education and experience. It depends. Most of you will have education first because that is your greatest accomplishment. But if you've had like 3 internships already in your field, you're going to want to lead with your experience. So again, whatever is your greatest accomplishment, that is what you're going to lead with. And under your education, I simply would have, you know, your degree. So, you know, BS and GIS, and have maybe that in italics. And then University of Oregon in bold, and then plain text would be Eugene, Oregon, and then 2014 or 2015. And why I say plain text for city and state and the years, we want that to kind of fade into the background. We don't, a lot of people will flush write it, and I think that's, again, a waste because the eye goes to where that white space is. So just have it all in one clean line, but using italics and bold for your position and your organization to add a little bit of interest so it doesn't all blend together. When you're, you also might have study abroad, that would be under education. You might have any honors and awards, anything that's education related. If you don't have a lot of experience in your field, you might choose to have a special project there. You might have some relevant coursework. Again, it's going to depend, and we can give you that feedback as you see your resume. I'm trying to just kind of do a real high level for you here today. Your experience, some people will just have the word experience. If you have general experience and not as relevant to your field, you can use that phrase as experience. If you've had the opportunity to have a variety of experiences, I like to help people name this. This is where you add some flexibility. So maybe you've worked in a lot of restaurants or retail, so you might have some great customer service experience. So maybe one section relates to those experiences that you might have had in high school and college. And then maybe you've had a couple of internships that relate to your field in the journalism field. So maybe it's a communication experience and you have an opportunity to list that. So they do need to be chronological, but I do encourage you, depending on what your experience has been, maybe you break that up so that you can focus on your relevant experience and then focus on your customer service experience. And again, here, we want to focus on really what did we accomplish, as I talked about earlier, how did we add value and all of that. We'll get into that a little bit later. And then leadership, this may actually dovetail into your experience. Again, this depends. So you may have had a lot of volunteer experience or leadership experience while you were on campus. You may say leadership experience and have those. But again, if it's very relevant to what you want to do, it might be under your experience section. It doesn't matter if you got paid for it or not necessarily. Experience is experience. So don't let that be something that might hold you back. And we can talk about that some more as well. Skills, for those of you like the GIS folks or the creative folks where it's Adobe Suite, this is where you're going to list mostly technical skills and language skills. Again, I don't recommend listing skills that relate to, that say just generically public speaking, customer service, those types of things. I want to see evidence of that in your experience. So keep the skills section focused on technical ones, software programs, and language ones is what I recommend. Again, it helps clean up that look. Interests, I'm a fan of interests. I think interests showcase, you a little bit outside of your education and your experience. However, I don't recommend that they be really generic. So I don't necessarily think you should say traveling, cooking, biking or something. Those are generic. But if you have traveled to some very unique places, maybe to Africa or to the Middle East, maybe include that. If you like cooking Italian food, maybe say you like cooking Italian food, but be more specific. I had flamingo dancers, and I thought, that's awesome. People will love that. Put that in there. It's a great, what's nice about that interest is, when you have that kind of awkward moment where you're walking back to do the interview, those are some of the things that might come up. Those are those icebreakers. So I do encourage you to include those as well. And then references. So we don't include references anymore on resumes, and I still see that from time to time, so I bring it up. And we also don't write references available upon request. So those things are just those are wasted. So I encourage you to get rid of that. You want to have a separate sheet with those ready to go with the same branding that you have for your resume, but you don't need to include that. That's a waste of time. Okay, so that's a quick overview. And what I'd like to do is kind of give you a little bit of an activity. So kind of like what Courtney did on Tuesday, we'll give you some time to do this, a couple of minutes. So I want you to practice writing out one of your experiences. So list the title of the experience, whether it was a server at a restaurant or it was a communications specialist at an internship. Write the title. And then I love those vertical lines. If you like those, you can add those. It's just shift and then the / key. It gives a nice, clean, professional look. List the organization where you did that in bold, and then another one of those vertical lines, and then the city and the state, and then put the years in parentheses. Again, this is your marketing document, so you don't have to be really technical and include the months on this part. It just gives a little bit cleaner look. If it was just for 3 months in the summer, you might say summer 2013. If it crossed over a couple of seasons, maybe you say winter to spring 2014. But that gives it a more simplistic so that people don't get distracted by counting on their fingers. So work on what that statement would be, and then think about, you might want to average about 3 bullets per one, but sometimes it's more relevant to have 2 bullets. Sometimes it's 5. Know that they're probably just going to read the first 2 bullets. But think about something that you've accomplished, something that you've done. Start with a very strong, powerful action verb. If you don't have that action verb list from our website, we'll send it to you in the packet. But lead with that strong, whether you launched something, you led something, you managed something, you assisted something, use those verbs. Know that you really don't want to go more than 2 lines on any kind of bullet, because again, you're going to lose your reader. And so just do that. So I'm going to give you just 2 minutes and work on one of your experiences. Hopefully, as I mentioned in the LinkedIn group, that you have your resume in front of you, and just mark it up, and we'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, now I know that's not enough time, so you can keep writing while we're doing this, but I'm going to go through kind of my final, my Favero's favorite tips. So these are the takeaways that I think are kind of most important to think about when you're creating a strong resume. I mentioned avoid using those months. That just kind of distracts the reader. You want to average about 3 bullets per your experience. Again, I'm not a rule follower on that. So maybe it's 2, maybe it's 5, but average around 3 just so it shows some depth to what you've done. Lead with the most important thing. I notice sometimes people almost do it chronologically. They list the first thing they did in their experience, then the second thing they did. Lead with the thing that you're most proud of, because that's what they're most likely to read. Know that you're selling yourself in this document. It is an advertisement of your greatest strengths and accomplishments. Certain words to avoid that I see a lot. People, I want you to focus on using those action verbs. So avoid words like worked. It's all work, so we don't need to use that word again. Duties include or responsible for. Those are 3 errors that I see a lot of, and they don't say anything to the reader. Again, I'm trying to help you get to that next level, so you want to have those really strong action verbs. Don't use less than 10-point font. For people like me that's close to 50, we don't always want to have to pull out our readers and try to see what you're writing there. Avoid serifs. Times New Roman is the most boring font in the world, so stay away from that font. Use a nice, clean, if you have a lot of content, I highly recommend Arial Narrow, as you can pack in a lot of content and it still looks very professional. Calibri is a nice, clean one, but try to avoid some of those serifs because it looks a little old school. And then I'm going to give you some of my favorite verbs. So if you've had the opportunity to do this, achieved, initiated, increased, launched, created, developed, analyzed, led, and managed. Those are some of my favorites. Okay, so now we're going to see how the Q&A is working. And